The cardboard box had been sitting in the same corner of the basement for 2 years, 3 months, and 11 days. I know the exact number because I'd been counting, not on purpose. It just happened, the way grief makes you remember things you never asked to remember. Eleanor had labelled it herself. Her handwriting, neat and slightly tilted to the right the way it always was, said winter scarves. Plus my scarf. I'd moved around it every time I went down to get the vacuum or the extra paper towels. I'd stepped over it. I'd looked away from it, and then one Tuesday morning in October, with the maple out front turning that deep orange she always loved, I finally picked it up. I don't know what I expected. Scarves, I suppose. What I found, underneath 2 folded scarves that still smelled faintly of her perfume, was a small white envelope taped to a USB drive. The envelope had my name on it. Norman. Just that. Her handwriting. I sat down on the concrete floor right there, next to the water heater, and I held it for a long time before I opened it. Eleanor and I had been married for 39 years when the stroke took her. She was 61. We'd had plans. We talked about doing the drive out to Nova Scotia in the fall, stopping in Quebec City for a few nights the way we always said we would. She had a list on her phone of restaurants she wanted to try. She showed it to me in July, 2 months before she died, laughing about how she kept adding to it faster than we could ever get through them. That was Eleanor, always planning ahead. After the funeral, after the out-of-town family left, and the casseroles stopped arriving and the sympathy cards stopped coming in the mail, I was left alone in the house in Barrie with the sound of the furnace and the scratch of a branch against the kitchen window. Our son Brandon called every Sunday. That was good. That mattered. His wife Renee was polite on the phone, always asking how I was eating, whether I was getting out. Standard questions. I answered them the standard way. I was 64 years old. I'd taken early retirement from the school board 2 years before Eleanor died, and she was the one who turned retirement into something that felt like a life rather than a waiting room. Without her, I was just a man rattling around a 4-bedroom house in a mid-sized Ontario city, watching the seasons change through windows she used to decorate with little paper cutouts at Christmas. I wasn't falling apart. I want to be clear about that. I was managing, but managing and living are 2 different things, and I knew the difference. What I didn't know, what I had absolutely no idea about, was that my son had already decided what my next chapter was going to look like, and he hadn't thought to mention it to me. The USB drive held one file, a video. I didn't watch it in the basement. I brought it upstairs, made a coffee, sat at the kitchen table in the morning light, and plugged it into my laptop. I had to try twice because my hands weren't quite steady. Her face came onto the screen and I stopped breathing for a moment. She'd set up the camera on her desk in the little office she used for her bookkeeping work. Behind her was the shelf with the blue dictionary and the photo from our trip to Prince Edward Island in 2009. The one where we're both squinting into the sun and laughing at something I can't remember anymore. She was wearing the green cardigan. She looked tired, but her eyes were clear. "Norman," she said, "if you're watching this, I'm gone, and it's been a while. I told myself I'd wait at least 2 years before this found you, because I wanted you to have time to breathe first. I hope you've been breathing." I pressed my fist against my mouth. "I need to tell you some things," she continued, "and I need you to hear them without defending anyone before I'm finished. You know how you do that. You hear 2 sentences and you start making excuses for people. Just let me get through this." That was so exactly her that I almost laughed. Almost. She leaned forward slightly, the way she did when she was being serious about something. "I've been watching Brandon and Renee for about 2 years now, Norm. Watching how they talk about the house, how they talk about your pension, how Renee brought up Hillcrest Gardens, that retirement community on Dunlop, twice in one dinner, in November, as if it was her idea, not something they'd discussed beforehand. You didn't notice. You never noticed those things, and I love you for it. But right now, I need you to notice." I set my coffee down. "I started keeping notes," she said, "in the blue notebook in the filing cabinet, bottom drawer, behind the tax folders from 2019. There are dates, things they said, things I heard. I also talked to our accountant, Ted. He knows. He has a copy of the notes. I asked him to hold it until you found this." She paused and looked down for a moment, then back up at the camera. "I'm not saying Brandon doesn't love you. I believe he does. But I also know that Renee has been talking to a real estate agent. I know that she has already looked up what the house would list for. I know that she has mentioned to at least 2 people. I heard one of these conversations myself, that your pension and the house together would set them up for a long time if things were handled right." The maple branch tapped against the window. "I also know," Eleanor said, her voice quieter now, "that Brandon told his friend Pete that he thought you were getting forgetful, that he was worried. Norm, you're 62 years old. You are not forgetful. You forget where you put your reading glasses, which is something you've done since you were 35. Don't let anyone turn that into something it isn't." She sat back. "I've taken steps, talked to Ted, and then talked to a lawyer. Not the one we used for the will. Someone independent, someone who doesn't know Brandon." She smiled then, a small tired smile that undid me completely. "You're going to be fine," she said. "You are not old. You are not declining. You are a 60-something man with a perfectly good mind and a paid-off house and a lot of good years left. Act like it. Don't let anyone else write the ending of your life for you." She reached toward the camera. "I love you, Norm. I'll put an extra 20 in your wallet because I know you'll have forgotten to stop at the ATM." The screen went black. I sat at the kitchen table for a very long time. I found the blue notebook exactly where she said it would be. Eleanor's notes were careful and precise dates in the margin. Who said what? The context. November 14th, Renee mentioned Hillcrest again over dinner, framed as just something to think about down the road. February 3rd, Brandon called to tell me about a documentary he watched about Alzheimer's. Asked if Dad had been checked recently. I said no. He said maybe it's worth doing. April 20th, overheard Renee on the phone in the backyard. Said, and I'm writing this word for word, the house alone is worth at least 780, probably more, and his pension doesn't stop. I read it twice. Then I sat with it. I want to be honest about what I felt, because it wasn't clean. It wasn't just anger. There was a grief underneath the anger that was almost worse than the grief I'd already been carrying. The grief of realizing that something you thought was solid had a hollow place inside it that you just hadn't found yet. Brendan was my son. I had coached his hockey teams. I had driven him to university orientation with the car so packed we could barely see out the back window. I had stood beside Eleanor in a hospital corridor for 6 hours the night his daughter Lily was born, drinking terrible coffee and feeling so full of something I couldn't name that I kept having to walk to the end of the hall and back just to contain it. And he had been talking to real estate agents about my house while his mother was still alive to hear about it. I called Ted the next morning. Ted Kowalski had done our taxes for 15 years. He was a quiet, careful man who wore the same style of brown cardigan regardless of the season. He picked up on the second ring. "I've been wondering when you'd call," he said. "You knew about the video?" "Eleanor made me promise not to say anything until you found it yourself. She was very specific about that." A pause. "I'm sorry, Norman. She was worried about you. Did she tell you everything she had?" "She showed me the notebook. She also showed me something else." He cleared his throat. "About 8 months before she died, she changed the beneficiary on her personal RRSP, a portion of it. Brandon is not the secondary beneficiary on that account anymore." "Who is?" "Your granddaughter, Lily. In trust until she's 25. Eleanor wanted to make sure something passed directly, without going through Brandon and Renee." I had to put the phone down for a moment and look out the kitchen window at the backyard. "She never told me," I said when I picked it up again. "She said you'd try to talk her out of it, because you'd feel like it was unfair to Brandon. She said that was exactly why she didn't tell you. That was also exactly her. I found the independent lawyer through a referral from a retired colleague who'd gone through a difficult estate situation of his own. Her name was Sylvia Park. Her office was above a print shop on Bayfield Street, and she did not waste time on pleasantries, which I found I appreciated. I brought the notebook. I brought a printout of the video transcript I'd typed up myself. I brought the documentation Ted had put together. She read through everything without speaking, then set it down. "Has your son spoken to you directly about the house?" she asked. "Not directly. He's mentioned a few times that it's a lot to maintain, that the winters are hard, that there are nice communities with everything taken care of. But no formal conversation, no request. Not yet." "All right." She folded her hands on the desk. "Your wife was smart. She documented things carefully. The RRSP beneficiary change is already done and legally solid. What I'd suggest for you, if you want to protect yourself going forward, is a few things." She went through them methodically, a codicil to my existing will, clearly laying out my intentions with the house. A power of attorney, not assigned to Brandon, assigned instead to a trusted friend, someone outside the immediate family. She suggested I also speak to my doctor about a formal cognitive assessment, not because anything was wrong, but because having a clean, dated document on file made it much harder for anyone to later claim I hadn't been competent when I made decisions. "People use that argument," she said matter-of-factly. "It's more common than you'd think. A clean assessment is just good insurance." I did the cognitive assessment the following week. My doctor was slightly puzzled by the request. I explained briefly that I wanted it for record-keeping. He nodded and ran through it, and when it was done, he leaned back and said, "Norman, you're as sharp as you were 10 years ago." I thanked him and drove home feeling something I hadn't felt in a while, which was solid. I should tell you about the conversation with Brandon. I didn't plan it. I didn't prepare a speech. One Sunday when he called, I let him go through the usual things. How was I eating? Was the furnace running okay? Had I thought any more about the Hillcrest open house that Renee had apparently signed me up to visit without asking me? And then I said, quietly, "Brandon, I found something your mother left me." Silence. "A video," I said, "on a USB drive. From before she died." "What kind of video?" "The kind where she talked about things she'd noticed, things she'd written down. She kept notes, Brandon. You know how your mother kept notes." Another silence, longer this time. "Dad." "I'm not angry," I said. And I meant it, more or less. I'm not calling to fight. I'm calling because I want you to hear directly from me that I know, and that I've already spoken to a lawyer, and that I've updated my affairs accordingly, and that I'm 64 years old and I'm not going anywhere except wherever I choose to go. He was quiet for a long time. "I didn't mean, we were just trying to think about what was best for you." "I know," I said, "but that's my job, not yours." Renee, I was told afterward by Brandon in a later call, was furious. She felt I was being paranoid, that Eleanor had poisoned me against my own family, that it was deeply unfair. I listened to Brandon relay this, and I said, I hope she feels better soon, and changed the subject. I don't know how to fully explain what I was feeling in those weeks. There was loss in it, a secondary loss, on top of the one I was already carrying. Grief is strange that way. It doesn't just come for the person you lost. It comes for the version of your life you thought you had. I believed we were a straightforward family. I'd believed Renee was simply a woman who wasn't very warm, not a woman who was calculating. Finding out the difference between those two things didn't make me hate her. It made me feel tired. But underneath the tiredness there was something else. Something Eleanor had put there deliberately by making that video, by hiding those notes, by changing that beneficiary 2 years before she died. She had believed I would be all right. She had arranged things so that I could be. She had reached forward from a time when she didn't know how long she had left, and set up the pieces so that, when the moment came, I would have what I needed to stand on. That kind of love is staggering, when you sit with it long enough to really feel it. I want to tell you about one more thing, because it matters to me to say it. Lily is 11. She comes to visit on alternating weekends, and Brandon brings her. And those visits are always slightly formal now. There is a politeness between Brandon and me that wasn't there before, a careful stepping around things, and I imagine that will take a while to soften. If it does, I don't know yet. But when Lily is here, she is completely herself, the way children are before the adult world fully gets to them. She goes through my bookshelves with great authority. She makes hot chocolate and stands at the counter supervising the marshmallows with the same focused attention Eleanor used to give to everything. She asks me about things Eleanor left around the house. A small wooden bird on the windowsill, a quilt on the guest bed, a framed map of Cape Breton on the stairwell wall. One afternoon, she picked up the photograph from our PEI trip that I'd moved from Eleanor's office to the living room after she died. She looked at it for a moment and said, "Grandma is really laughing in this one." She was, I said. I can't even remember what was funny. Lily set it down carefully and said, "I think it's okay not to remember every part. As long as you remember it was good." I don't know where an 11-year-old gets that kind of wisdom. Maybe from the same place Eleanor got hers. I started making a list of my own. Not of restaurants like Eleanor did. Mine is different. Things I want to do, places I've always meant to see. The drive to Nova Scotia is at the top. Quebec City second. My retired colleague from the school board has been talking about a week of fly fishing up near Sudbury, and I told him last week that I'm in. The house is mine. I have made sure of that. The decisions about what happens to it, and when, and how, are mine to make in my own time, in my own way, with a clear head and a clean document on file with my doctor and a lawyer who is not sentimental about anyone's feelings. And on some mornings when the light comes in through the kitchen window at the right angle, and the maple out front is doing whatever it does in that particular season, I think I can still hear Eleanor somewhere in the house. Not a haunting, nothing like that, just a presence, the way a room still holds the warmth of someone who was just in it. She did everything she could for me, while she still could. The least I can do is make it count. I keep thinking about the blue notebook, not the USB, not the video. The notebook. Because the video was Eleanor speaking to me, and that was its own kind of miracle. But the notebook was something quieter and in some ways more devastating. It was her sitting at her desk on ordinary evenings, writing down dates and exact words, building something careful and solid while she was still here. That took a kind of integrity. I'm not sure I would have had the presence of mind to practice. She knew what was happening around her. She knew it clearly, and instead of denying it and making excuses for people she loved, she wrote it down. She did the harder, more honest thing. I've thought a lot about what it means to do the right thing when it costs you something. Eleanor loved Brandon. There is no version of this story where she didn't. But she also refused to let her love for him become a reason to leave me unprotected. She held both things at once, the love and the clear-eyed recognition of what was happening. And she chose to act on what she knew rather than on what she wished were true. That's not a small thing. Most of us, when we're faced with something uncomfortable about someone we care about, find a way to look slightly to the side of it. Eleanor looked straight at it, and then she did something about it. What I've come to understand, sitting with all of this, is that the choices people make tend to catch up with them one way or another. Not in any mystical sense. I'm not talking about fate or karma or anything like that. I just mean, practically, in the real and ordinary way that actions have consequences. Brandon and Renee made choices. They chose to discuss my home as an asset before I was ready to have that conversation. They chose to mention retirement communities as if the idea had just occurred to them. They chose, somewhere along the way, to stop thinking about what I needed and start thinking about what they might eventually have access to. Those choices narrowed what was possible between us. That's not punishment, that's just how things work. And I made choices too. I chose to listen to Eleanor rather than explain her concerns away. I chose to call Ted rather than let the information sit in a box. I chose to walk into Sylvia's office above the print shop and lay everything on the table. Those choices opened things up rather than closing them. The house is mine. My clarity is on the record. My granddaughter has something coming to her that no one can redirect. None of that happened by accident. It happened because I did the uncomfortable work of thinking clearly when everything in me wanted to grieve quietly and assume the best. There's something I want to say to anyone who recognizes something of themselves in the story. You are allowed to use your own mind. You are allowed to ask hard questions about what people around you are doing and why. Loving someone does not require you to stop paying attention. In fact, I'd argue that the most important form of love, the kind Eleanor showed me, is the kind that stays honest even when honesty is inconvenient. She didn't leave me that video because she was bitter. She left it because she believed I was capable of handling what was in it and making good decisions with it. She trusted my ability to think and to act. I'm 64 years old. Lily is 11, and she stands at my counter supervising marshmallows with the kind of focus that reminds me of her grandmother. The Nova Scotia drive is booked for September. I have a long list of things I intend to do. Eleanor believed I had good years ahead of me. I've decided she was right.